Hello, welcome to Image Bearers. My name is Otoma Edje. I'm very excited to have you join the program today. For those of you that may not be aware, we're on season 3, episode 51. Image Bearers is actually a video podcast to help us better understand the scriptures, human nature, and history as we strive to honor God with our lives. And with each episode, we strive to be inspired, have some fun, and build family in the process. Very excited to have joining the program today, Brett McCracken, who's written this awesome book right here, which is the Wisdom Pyramid. And we'll be going through this today. And I think with the pandemic, I think a lot of us have probably been consuming a lot more digital media than we typically would. And I think this episode can definitely help us perhaps correct that. So Brett McCracken, just a little bit of information about him, is the senior editor for the Gospel Coalition. He is also the author of a number of books besides the Wisdom Pyramid. And one of the things that I learned even just in reading his book is that there are 40 times more bytes of data on the internet than there are stars in the observable universe. So how do you navigate the internet with wisdom? And that's really what we're going to be talking about today, how we absorb things through the word, through life, and maintain our sanity. Today also joining me is Mark Kang, who is the evangelist of the church here in Detroit. He's a good friend of mine. And we'll talk about the book a little bit more as we go. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Again, Brett, thank you so much for joining the program today.
Thank you guys so much. It's an honor to be with you.
Awesome.
Amen. Thanks for writing this awesome book. Mark, why don't you go ahead and start us up with the first few questions?
Will do. So, Brett, just want to say, love your book. Fast becoming a groupie. I have recommended it to my leaders. I've recommended it to kind of my fraternity of, church leaders, and I know that they're loving it. I wanted to start off by asking if, obviously share a little bit about yourself. Kind of specifically, I'd love to hear about your sort of the genesis of your relationship with wisdom, and then ultimately what prompted you to and inspired you to write the book.
Yeah, that's a big question, and I could talk a long time about that because I think a book like this, any book is the culmination of many years, many experiences, and particularly a book like this, I would say of the 4 books I've published, this one is the most like just collected ideas and things I've been thinking about for a long time, life experiences that have just kind of come together in this mix that is this book. But I would say a couple of the more specific catalysts for me to write this now. One is becoming a father. So I became a dad for the first time in 2018, and I've since had another son. So I have 2 sons, and this is the first book I've written as a dad. And I think that something changes in the way you look at life when you become a parent and you start thinking about, how do I impart wisdom to my boys in a world like this? How can I raise them to be wise? It's already hard enough for me as a 38-year-old in this world who's grown up in the church, came from a great Christian family, have been around really solid, wise Christian believers my whole life. And it's still hard to be wise in this world.
Yes.
So if it's a challenge for me, I know it's going to be a challenge for my 2 boys. And so I wanted to write a book that I could bequeath to them and their generation as some sort of guidance for how to be wise in this digital world that we're living in. So I would say that's on a personal level, one of the things that inspired this book. Also just the nature of my profession and my work with the Gospel Coalition. It's an internet-based ministry. So I spend all day, every day kind of on the internet, in the space of the internet, spend a lot of time on social media for my job. And I've just seen firsthand how toxic it can be, and how it can form my soul in negative ways by spending so much time in this space. Yes. Now, what I'm trying to do with my writing for the Gospel Coalition website is to bring hopefully healthy like perspectives and materials and content to the internet. And I think that's a worthwhile endeavor, but it doesn't change the fact that most of our experiences online these days, on social media, are forming our souls in negative, harmful ways, I would suggest. And I've experienced that firsthand. So just on a personal level with my life is as a digital journalist, has given me a front row seat to some of the dynamics of unhealth that I talk about in the book. So yeah, and I think the third like thing that led me to write this book is just pastoral. So I'm an elder at a local church here in Southern California, and I spend a lot of time discipling people and trying to help Christians, be wise and be holy in this world. And it's tough. And I think that there's some unique challenges to the digital ecosystem of the internet that make discipleship really hard. And so I've experienced that pastorally as a leader in our church. And so I wrote this book out of that perspective as well. So as a parent, as a pastor, and then as a practitioner, I would say are the three things that kind of coalesced to become this book.
I love that. And I think it's so true as a parent. I can speak as a dad that you do ask different questions, right? Like you go from like asking, hey, what is good and what is true? Then you start to ask like, what will this produce in my child? And you kind of ask a little bit of a deeper layer. Kind of a follow-up to this first question. I'm just curious, when you look at your own childhood, for example, like when do you feel like wisdom was a thing for you? You know what I mean? Like, were you at 15, or when did you feel like, or maybe it was like 8, or did somebody talk to you about wisdom? I know for me, for example, it was like my mom telling me the story of Solomon, right? And it was like, oh, he prayed for it, like you can just get it and he got rich, and I just thought it would be, what was that like for you as a kid, your journey? Like, when did that start?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was like aware of it as a kid in the way that you are as an adult looking back on your childhood, but I definitely think, growing up in a healthy Christian family, church-going family, I do remember my dad particularly talking a lot about wisdom and, make wise choices, he would say a lot. And I just remember him always associating wisdom with worshiping God and kind of honoring God. Awesome. Like honoring God with your actions and your life. That's wisdom. And so I think I just picked that up from a young age, that wisdom is this precious thing that is different than knowledge. It's different than what I learn at school. It's different than facts. It's this this thing that, is so important for your Christian life. As you grow as a Christian, as you grow in your love for God, you hopefully are growing in wisdom as well. So yeah, I think I just picked it up from my Christian upbringing, particularly my dad. And I talk about my dad a few times in the book, and I dedicate the book to him, probably for that reason, that he was a very like crucial figure of wisdom in my life, and still is to this day.
That's awesome. Your book, and you brought up, knowledge and the distinction. Your book makes a distinction between the two, which I thought was particularly astute and insightful. And you talk about they're distinct, but they have a relationship. And I think you talked about how good information can amplify wisdom, and obviously bad information can, and I thought that was great. And for those that haven't read the book, you talk a little bit about how the way we intake information is making us sick, right? I think you talk about too much and too fast, or tastes too good. Can you kind of break that down, especially for some of the listeners that maybe haven't read the book?
Yeah. So there definitely is a difference between wisdom and information, but there's an interesting relationship, and the book is really all about how certain dynamics of information in the information age, the internet age, are working against our wisdom and actually eroding our wisdom a little bit. Yes. At the very moment when we need our wisdom to be kind of firing on all cylinders, so that we can better navigate this information environment that we live in. So it's kind of this paradoxical kind of chicken or egg sort of thing. Like, bad information habits make us foolish and they erode our wisdom. But in order to not have bad information habits, you have to be wise. You know, you need to have discernment to be able to compose a healthy diet of information, which is kind of what the book is about. So yeah, the three dynamics that are particularly unhealthy that I talk about in the first half of the book with regard to information. One is that there's too much information. I call that information gluttony. There's just an overload of information in our world, that the whole quote about there's more data than there are stars in the universe, right? It's mind-boggling how much information we're kind of swimming in every day. And I don't think that that is conducive to our wisdom for various reasons. There's science behind this. We can talk about a little bit more about our brains kind of being overwhelmed with the information glut, such that we're losing the capacity to go deeper and to think more critically, because our poor brains are spending all their energy just trying to like frenetically triage on any given moment, right? So that part of the information gluttony dynamic is very problematic for our wisdom, because if our brains are literally losing the ability to like think critically and reflectively, then how are we going to become wise?
Yes.
So the second dynamic is too fast. So too much information and then too fast. So the speed of information. And of course, we know from the Bible that wisdom is so much about, slowing down, right? Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. That's what James says. And we do the opposite in the internet age, right? We're quick to become angry. We're quick to speak. We post things on social media before we even think twice about whether we should. We forward a conspiracy theory article on Facebook before we take the time to really look into the source. Media, the news media, amplifies the problem by sharing a breaking news story without sufficiently kind of giving us the context. And so we just live in this frenetic pace of information that is not helpful for wisdom. It makes fools of us, literally. So I think that that's another sickness. So the gluttony of information, the speed of information, and then the third one I talk about is the orientation of information around the individual, kind of the two focused on me and my tastes and preferences. So just like, if I only ate food that I liked, like if my diet was entirely consisting of cookies and cake, which are some of my favorite things to eat,
of course,
I would die, right? That would be a recipe for unhealth.
Yes.
And the same is true of information. If we're only taking in information that suits us and our preferences, things that we agree with, that we like, and we kind of mute any voice that challenges us or that, complicates our narrative, then that's going to be unhealthy. But never has it been easier than it is now to build a reality, a media reality that's entirely suited to you, right? We call it an iPhone for a reason. It's about the eye. It's about tailoring your experience of the world to you as an individual. And if you don't like something, you just swipe away, right? You scroll down to the next thing. You unfollow that thing. Mm-hmm. So that's problematic, right? That if we're all kind of building our own curated, perfect for me realities, then that means there's billions of different realities out there, and none of them are quite syncing up with each other. And we see that, right, with the debates in our society that are kind of at a standstill right now. Yes. We're not making progress on these debates. And one of the big reasons is because we're coming to these debates with entirely different realities based on our intakes of information. So we could get into how that has played out with COVID, for example, with, what different people believe different things about the pandemic, in part because their curated feed of media reinforces what they want to believe to be true. And so, it's just that's a recipe for disaster in any society when there's no more consensus, there's no more agreed upon facts. When we're in this post-truth world that we're in, how are any of us going to be wise in a world like that?
Wow, well said. So true. And I think so many of the things you said, speed is contrary to wisdom, right? I think if you look at like the word haste in the scriptures, it's always something bad, and yet there's this pressure, right? I think you alluded to in your book, there's a pressure to be a thought leader, and we got to respond now.
Yeah.
But that's sort of taken away in sort of our modern habit of just the internet and everything. You alluded to this already. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more, but you talked about the impact, the spiritual impact, or even the physiological impact of the internet, the continual use of the internet is having on our brains. And again, just spiritually, but also just kind of what you understand physiologically, what's it doing to us?
Yeah, that part of the research for writing this book was super interesting because I read a few books that really do deep dives into the neuroscience about brains and how our brains are literally being rewired by the internet. And the way that we process information today is so different than the way we processed information 30 years ago. We process way more of it. So the glut of information is changing our brains. And we just also process it kind of in kind of a mile wide, inch deep sort of fashion, where we just kind of skim. Even the way we read articles on the internet, you just kind of skim and you try to find like keywords.
100%.
It's this kind of strip mining approach versus a like slow excavation of meaning. And that is, our brains are adjusting to that mode of processing. The more that you do something, the more your brain adapts to that.
Yeah.
And so that's the really troubling thing about life in the internet age is if we're spending all day, every day, kind of strip mining information, scanning articles, being overwhelmed with trivial information on our social media feeds, it's going to change the way our brains function. And I see it in my own life, right? I find it harder today to read a book because my brain has been so shaped by the internet and that kind of scanning, skimming way of reading that I struggle to sit down and read a book just kind of slowly in a linear fashion.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons why, and we can talk about this later when we go through the wisdom pyramid. That's one of the reasons I made books an entire category of wisdom, because
Absolutely.
I think we need to retrain our brains to process information slower and in the way that reading books can do.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, one thing I definitely appreciate about your book is you went through and put together, as you said, this wisdom pyramid, which kind of breaks down, and shows in the illustrated fashion, just how we should kind of regard wisdom and some of the priorities there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and you can kind of break down the wisdom pyramid.
There it is.
Yep.
All right. So do you want me to just go through each level?
Yeah, if you can just kind of go through each level. I mean, the intent obviously is for us to not really, we should probably go through each one of these in our life to get wisdom. It's just in what proportion.
Yeah.
I know, as you mentioned in your book, this is from the food pyramid. So if you can maybe just break that down.
Okay. Yeah. So like the food pyramid, the categories at the bottom are the more foundational, the more important parts of our diet. And the ones closer to the top are the use sparingly categories. So the Bible, God's word, is of course the most important source of wisdom for us. It's direct from the source of wisdom, God himself. It's his direct revelation to us. So that's got to occupy the foundation of our diet. The church is the second level up, because I think that the church is God's presence among his people.
Yes.
So if we get wisdom from God first and foremost, then it makes sense that the church needs to play a part in that, because this is God's people that he's gathering together, that he's shaping, this is his mission in the world, right? He established the church for a purpose. And so Christians who neglect church or downplay its importance, I think, are missing out on a crucial part of becoming wise.
Yeah.
The next level up is nature, and some people have questions about this one. They find it interesting that nature, I put, that's the third most important category, but my logic is wisdom is proximity to God. Like, if God is the author of wisdom, then the things that are closest in proximity to God are the things most likely to garner wisdom for us.
Absolutely.
And nature is God's handiwork. It's his creation. He made it, and there's no intermediary between God and nature, right? This is his direct handiwork. And so it reveals things about him, right? The scriptures even talk about this. Romans 1, Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. So if we go outside and if we look around at the trees and at the sky and at the animals and the flowers, and we truly look at them and sense them, I think there's wisdom to be gained, especially in the digital world where we spend a lot of time looking at screens and not outside looking at God's creation. So I think that's a really indispensable source of wisdom for us. The next level up, I mentioned this a little bit already, but books, they're carriers of wisdom, not only for the content that they have within them, but also the way that they train our minds to process and to think critically, to think on a deeper level, to be able to go deep with one idea and one author's perspective for 200 pages or more. That's like a really important skill that we need to have if we're going to become wise, this ability to listen, to be quick to listen and slow to speak. The act of reading a book is basically practicing being quick to listen and slow to speak.
Absolutely.
And then the second to the top level is beauty. There's a guitar there, so some people think I'm talking about music only, but I'm really talking about beauty generally, the arts. And this is basically like human creation of beauty. So nature is sort of like God's beauty. It's his creation of beauty. So the beauty and the nature levels are related, but they're different. And the reason I put beauty a little bit higher is because it's man-made, and so it's got greater potential for error. So it can be full of goodness and truth, and it can be enlightening to us, and often is. But sometimes, as we know, the arts and human creation can lead us to foolishness as well. So, but that said, I personally have gained so much wisdom from art and music and films and just the beautiful things that God's image bearers, God is a creator, and he created humans to bear his image. And part of that image that we bear is creativity, and so when we live into that as humans, when we are creating art and beautiful things, we are imaging God. And so it makes sense that we can gain wisdom by doing that and by appreciating that. So, and then finally, at the top of the wisdom pyramid, which is the least important category, the most problematic, is the internet and social media. And this is basically, it's on there. So I'm not suggesting that it can never be a source of wisdom. I'm just saying that it needs to occupy kind of the least important place of your diet, because if it occupies one of the more foundational levels of your diet, that's where we go off track. That's where we become foolish. And many of us are becoming foolish because we've flipped it. We put our smartphone where the Bible is, and we put the Bible, at the top. So I really think that what I'm doing here and what I'm suggesting here is just the proper orientation of your diet of information. So any one of these categories, if it's the only thing, might lead you astray. Maybe the Bible is the exception. Like you can live on bread alone if it's the Bible, because that's God's direct revelation. But if you take nature on its own and you don't have any of the other categories, that can lead you to foolishness, right? You can become this pantheistic, whatever.
Yes.
If you only take beauty and the arts as your only source of wisdom, that's going to be an imbalanced diet and you're going to get sick. So I think a healthy diet is well-rounded, and I'm just suggesting that prioritizing the things that are closest in proximity to God as the author of wisdom, that's going to be a recipe for health in the digital age.
Love it.
Thank you. That's awesome. So at the very top of the pyramid, you had obviously the internet, Twitter, Facebook, what have you. But I think what you mentioned in your book is that you're not recommending that we totally dissociate or not engage in the internet. You just provide some guidance into how we should go about that. So can you please maybe provide a few insights as to, some road rules for the internet, if you will?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I in the chapter on the internet and social media, I tried to make it more of a positive vision for like not just all the reasons why it's problematic, but here are some ways to go about life online in healthier ways. So some of the things that I suggest, one is being intentional. So not just going on your phone or going on Google passively, where you're just kind of like, I'll go wherever the algorithms take me today. That's a recipe for foolishness, because then you're just kind of wasting time. You're going to click on whatever, Facebook wants you to click on. You're going to find yourself like clicking on one thing and then the next thing. And then an hour later, you're like, how did I get here and why, So I think intentionality is key. So one thing I suggest is just only go online if you have a purpose. If there's like a specific thing you need to read or research, and only stay online as long as you need to. So don't just pull out your phone when you have 5 minutes to spare, and just kind of scroll through it when you're bored. Like, use it intentionally. I think that's one way we can be better, wiser users of the internet. Another thing I say is just making sure that the voices we're listening to online are trustworthy. And so if you are going to be reading articles online or listening to podcasts or whatever, just try to like focus on the best, right? Don't spend your life going a mile wide and an inch deep. Focus on like a few really good quality things that maybe your pastor or your parents or people in your life who are wise, who you trust, have recommended.
Yeah.
Like I kind of have a personal rule of like, I'm not going to read an article unless like 10 or more people who I trust have recommended it or who I've seen share it. I'm not going to probably like listen to a podcast or watch a Netflix show unless a critical mass of people in my life, attest to its value. Because life is too short. There's just too much content out there to like waste time, going a mile wide and an inch deep. I want to spend my time intentionally on a few really quality things. And then one other thing I would say is, and this is kind of getting into the way that the Gospel Coalition tries to use the internet for a good purpose. And that is, if we're using things online to point people away from the internet, to point people to some of those lower categories of wisdom, the church, scripture, then that's a good use of the internet, right? If you're using social media to point people to the Bible or celebrate the importance of the church, then that's a good use of social media. So yeah, using that highest category to point people to the lower categories, is, in my view, a really good way to use it.
Well said.
Well, thanks so much. I can tell you're a writer. You have a way with words. I definitely appreciate that.
Thank
So
you.
for those that want to learn more about your ministry and perhaps the Gospel Coalition, how can they go about that?
Yeah, I mean, I mostly write these days on the Gospel Coalition, so that's probably the best place to connect with me and see kind of my weekly articles that I typically produce. Otherwise, I'm on social media. You can find me on Twitter, although I hesitate to suggest follow me on social media because my book is largely about spending less time on social media. So, yeah, but I would say read my stuff on the Gospel Coalition. That's where I pour out most of my my passion these days.
I'll try to put a link in the show notes. And you also review. Do you still review movies too, or no?
Yeah, that's part of my task at the Gospel Coalition is to oversee the arts and culture section of our website. So it's fun because I love writing about movies and music, and I think it's a really important area these days for Christians to be wise about, right? To be able to critically think about this stuff rather than be passive and like, oh yeah, I saw this movie, I didn't really think about it, and you know.
Do you review superhero movies like mainstream?
Sometimes, not a lot. I tend to gravitate towards more like indie films personally, but sometimes I'll write about superhero movies.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I have 3 boys, that's why I had to ask.
All right. Well, we're going to just share a few things, just what we appreciate about your book and just what you've done. Awesome. I'll go ahead and just start out, and then after that, Mark is going to do a quick lightning round. So I think for me, there's a lot of things in your book. I think the one that I really want to go back to and actually read the book that you shared about is the book Shallows, and just the impact of the internet on your brain. And I think that, I'm someone who's on the internet a lot. I think that you were very open just about, how, you wake up, you look at your phone, you go to bed, you look at your phone. And I was like, you know what? I need to stop that. And so it's been a lot.
I did that too. Before I started writing the book, I did that too, but I have changed that habit since writing the book.
Yeah. So I think I've gotten a lot better with that. I think it's one thing at a time. I think now it's also then through the day, just trying to have less, there, because as you said, it's your brain is, well, my brain, should I say, is getting, I guess, short-circuited to just want the brownies, so to speak, literally speaking. So I definitely appreciate that. And I think obviously the way that you put together the wisdom pyramid, which kind of showed, and I appreciate you explaining it today too, that, you kind of arranged it in reference to proximity or closeness to God, in a sense, as you saw it. So I think that was very, very helpful. So thank you so much just for your book.
Thank you.
But before I get into the lightning round, I wanted to share briefly as well. Your book, it puts words to thoughts and challenges. You diagnose what we are going through in our churches and in the world, and you accurately give you present the antidote, which of course is wisdom. I really want to encourage you. Like, I don't know if you've thought of writing a book on like your journey of wisdom, but I think that's something, because this directs what we're going through now. But I mean, that's something that would be very, very inspiring. I love what you say about, I love the sequence, and when you talk about nature, I do think that there's wisdom in God's design. Books are immersive, which is why I love your book, but also I love what you're saying about books. And as I was reading it, I was kind of getting immersed in all that. And lastly, I just want to say, I think that I speak for ministers that have read your book and used it. You've provided us with a valuable tool to help us to kind of equip our people, to equip the church in a great way. And like I said, a lot of times things fail not because we don't have faith or we don't have love or desire. A lot of times things fail because we don't have wisdom.
Yeah.
It's that whole zeal without knowledge type thing, and that we have a lot of passion for things. We want the world to change. We want to build our churches. But oftentimes we just lack wisdom. And I think, this is a book that I felt like needed to be written. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that.
No worries. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. What is your favorite food?
My favorite food is actually a pairing of a drink and a food, and it's a chocolate chip cookie with a little bit of sea salt paired with black coffee.
Amen.
That's my favorite combo.
Awesome. Your favorite film?
My favorite film is this kind of indie film called The Tree of Life. It is directed by Terrence Malick, which is like, he's a Christian filmmaker, but it's my favorite film, The Tree of Life.
Who is your favorite musician?
Currently, it's a band called Poor Bishop Hooper. They're a husband and wife kind of folk duo, Christians.
Very cool. So obviously this question is going to change, depending what season you like. But right now, favorite book of the Bible?
Right now, my favorite book of the Bible, because I'm reading it in my Bible reading plan, is Romans.
Excellent. Who is your favorite Bible character?
Yeah, this was a hard one to think about, but I was trying to think of an obvious one. Like, I was going to say Paul, but that's kind of like, I don't know, everyone's favorite New Testament. So I would say Priscilla and Aquila.
Nice.
I think that they represent marketplace Christians who kind of work in a certain field, but also are trying to use their skills to advance the gospel. So I really like that about them.
Love it. Outside of the Bible, your favorite book and the author?
The first one that comes to mind is a fiction book called Gilead, written by Marilyn Robinson. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning book, very deeply Christian, beautiful.
Awesome. And if you, what's a book that, other than The Wisdom Pyramid, that you think everyone should read in the next 12 months?
Oh, man. There's a book that just came out called Reading the Times by Jeffrey Bilbro, and it's kind of a good book to pair with The Wisdom Pyramid. It's also about how we as Christians engage with the news and kind of our diet of media. So it's called Reading the Times, and I would really recommend it.
What would you say is the most important book, theological book, in the last 50 years?
I would say J.I. Packer, Knowing God.
Outside of the Bible, who you say is your favorite personality, hero? It doesn't have to be alive, just sort of, historically person.
I would say C.S. Lewis is someone who I've, just always admired and tried to model my own writing off of him.
Favorite place to live?
Yeah, is this just like hypothetical? Like, if I could
totally.
live anywhere?
Yeah, you could live anywhere.
I would say France, particularly the south of France, like Provence area.
All right. Parlez-vous français?
No, I mean a little bit, but not really.
Okay, I'm Canadian, so we get a little bit of that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Where do you most want to visit?
High on my list of places I want to visit is Chile, particularly southern Chile, Patagonia region. I would love to go there.
Awesome. Last one. If you could place a billboard in the middle of your city, what would it say?
I would probably just put the words of Matthew 11:28 through 30. The words of Jesus, come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest. I think that's the verse Jesus says that people today who are anxious and exhausted and worn out by life, they need to hear those words. So I would love to put that on a billboard just to remind people who Jesus is and what he offers.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining the program today, Brett. I definitely appreciate your work. I actually listened to one of your other books too. I just love your writing. I do want to say, for those that watch this episode, please consider subscribing to the channel so we can definitely get this out to more people on the interwebs. And also, for those of you that want to watch perhaps the next video, I'm going to provide a link to a video by Marty Solomon of the Bema podcast that you can watch next. Thanks so much for your time. Take care.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you, guys.